So we're going to play. And what I've got in my hand is a magnetic coil system with a polished rose quartz crystal in a torus shape. This is the universal divine feminine energy. And it's very difficult to hear, but you can feel a little bit, right? And the audio that's playing here is a high resolution imagery of crystal bowls and voice. So I'm going to touch this to her. We're going to start right here. In the umbilical, to insert new software. We're going to work our way up our chakra system. Can you guys hear a little bit? And the geometry that's generated on her body, can we turn the house lights down, please? If anybody has the dimmer. Oh, if it was a little darker, we could see some of the geometry playing on her body. We think our body stops at our skin. But your body is immense. It's infinite. So I had previously put a little of essential oil on this crystal. So we're going to touch her forehead a little bit. Is that too strong?
No.
We're going to be resonating her body in a range of frequencies. So I ask everybody in this room to focus your intention on this interaction. And I can feel with this hand the vibrations going right through her skeletal system, her muscles. We have an Ave Maria being chanted with crystal bowls. And I can place this on joints. I'll grab your arm, just let it go. Got it. And resonate the tendons, the cartilage, the marrow inside the bones. And we're speaking to the light body in the language of the body. Whatever free energy we create must run on the benevolent, loving energy of the universe. I can place this on her feet and resonate. You feel that? Within 12 minutes, we can have complete homeostasis of the body. We can turn any homeopathic tincture, herbal, into a sound resonant frequency and insert it into the body, and the body will feel like you actually consumed the medicine because it all has a frequency. We can regenerate muscles. This body, just to give you an idea, was designed for a 1,000-year lifespan at what we would consider the first level of consciousness, which we're not even at the moment. Many esoterics call this fourth dimension or fifth dimensional frequency. Third dimensional frequency runs roughly at 30 gigahertz in a field of about 60 gigahertz. That's how fast solid matter is resonating at. If you want to regenerate cartilage in the knee, so a 40-minute session would put you into an out-of-body state where I can completely enter the energy field while the consciousness of the individual can travel a little bit, have interaction with They're guides. Show me the science behind this, the proof. I'm showing you the proof through experience. I'm inviting everybody to hear, to be an experiencer. Forget proof and measurement at the moment. How many gigahertz? How does this work? What papers were published to do this? You're talking about work that is timeless. When coherent sound travels through the body, through nature, through a living being, it talks to the DNA. At the most basic level, sound traveling through your muscles, coupled with a light geometry, sets up a quantum state to be interdimensional, which DNA is interdimensional. So what I would normally do is work through an entire system here. I pay attention to what's coming through the projector. We don't need any of these tools. They're bridges to remind us what is possible. I can teach people to have mental telepathic abilities awakened. We're going to just have you rest here for a little while. Normally I would do this with glass, but this is what we have at this moment. We can take water. Everybody focus your intention on your glass of water that you drink in the morning. Touch the sound resonance, and on the top of the water, I know you can't see it right now, I can see the cymatic pattern of the harmonic frequency flowing through this water, and I can shine the geometries through the water. And if I had a glass, like a champagne glass, it would float. The cymatic pattern, the living geometry of the water that you could see. And by looking at it, your eyes absorb the information and start reprogramming your mind to build new neural connections to restructure your entire brain so it's a better transmitter and receiver of the God-loving energy that is coming through your heart, which is the portal to creation. What's in your coconut is not necessarily the most interesting thing in this body. This was made as an off-the-shelf system. My intention is to create healing as a performance art because I'm an artist. There is no platform on the planet. There's no scientific platform for what we do. All there is resistance. So I renounce academic science. I renounce the mathematics that limit my understanding of what and who I am. I respect it. It is great rigor. If I touch this table, I can resonate the entire table, the entire stage, the concrete, and it will work all the way through the city of Boulder. That's how powerful these frequencies are. How are we doing? This is only with minimal power. We have the capability, and thank you. You can just enjoy if you like, or you can slowly get up.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to finish in a few minutes.
Okay.
And just wait a moment right here. Don't get up too fast. And this is my water, but any water that you drink from around here will be already structured with the healing intention of what was projected through this interaction. I recommend everybody in this room to drink lots of water because we resonated with this experience, the water in your bodies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I could definitely feel it.
I have done journeys on these technologies with and without any implements. I have also experienced with psychedelics to go into other realms that our body right now is limited in wanting to go, just as an experience. It's not for everybody. So the last thing I want to leave you with is a little mantra that I created. Because I designed a laboratory called the Center of Mass Creation, and the things that I do are called engines of mass creation. This is an engine of mass creation. My art is an engine of mass creation. Look at this beautiful visionary artwork on the walls and inside our art tent. That is a view of humanity in 4th, 5th, 12th dimensional reality. We are angels. We are the ascended realm. We are the cosmic realm. There is no physics to understand that. There is no science to understand that. So I invite everybody to just feel this energy I'm going to put out. We're going to be speaking to the highest level of who and what you are for this entire planet. I am an engine of mass creation. I am the center of mass creation. I am an engine of mass creation. I am the center of mass creation. I am an engine of mass creation. Let us visualize world peace. The banking system dissolving. The stock market leaving us. The pharmaceutical industry dissolving. Awakening everywhere of the planet. Of all those souls who are in position to give provisions to this new energy. We invite everybody to awaken on this entire planet. All of those areas of conflict in Syria and everywhere else, we heal. Heal our leaders. We are the 1% who will soon be the 99%. Namaste. So I get an assistant back there to help me tear down real quick?
It's going to take a little time for Fernando to break down,
10
about
minutes.
5-10 minutes or
Yeah.
so, and we have a break coming up at 3:15. So we have a choice. Do we want to leave now for a break and come back just a few minutes early to begin our next talk? Does that sound all right? Exchanged. We're going to be soothed by Michael Riversong's music as we started the day today. If you were here, you heard that gorgeous harp music to set the tone this morning. He's recorded about 30 albums, and some of them are very much aligned and designed for healing the physical body. So you might want to check out Michael's work. But his other great passion in life has been the work of Nikola Tesla. He's been working with Tesla Energy since 1984, and he's given a great deal of thought and consideration to how our shift, our ultimate inevitable shift to clean energy sources, will impact the recovery and the thriving of planet Earth. So please welcome Michael Riversong, who will play a little bit for us before he gets going on his talk.
Thank you. Thank you. For that piece, I used what's called Dorian. If you're into music, you know what that means. The Dorian is balanced on both sides of the center point, and it's something we're seeking in this movement. It's one of the reasons why I was so happy to take on this task of putting together a particular presentation. One of the things that I know a lot of speakers like to do is tell you a lot about why they're qualified to make this particular presentation. Given that we don't have a whole lot of time, I'm going to skip a lot of that. Just rest assured that there's been a lot of homework that went into this since 1984. And that was the year things started really changing, and that's when I started recording albums, and when there were a few miracles that happened that brought me into contact with inventors and researchers in a very big way. And I was able to see a lot of the inner workings of how these inventions come together. And then later on, for 9 years, I operated an environmental consulting service. And surveyed a lot of buildings and found the environmental problems, wrote reports, and from those reports, people were able to make improvements. This is something that's very common in Europe, but in America is almost unheard of, and that's eventually why it was shut down, because really there wasn't a market for it in this country. But we still have the knowledge and the ideas. One of the things that really got me going was way back in 1970 when we had the first Earth Day. That was the only day I ever ditched from high school. I was one of those people that was a little bit on the edge, but I certainly wasn't a hoodlum either, so they never knew what to do with me. And that Earth Day, I said, I gotta take part in that. For some reason, there's always been this concern with the environment. Part of it probably has a lot to do with watching too many really beautiful places that I used to play getting paved over and turning into just more junky suburbs. I think a lot of people have had that experience, and that might be why some of the people are in this room right now. We've had a lot of things that drove the environmental movement back in the 1960s and 70s. And these were concerns that came up through various sources, including water pollution, air pollution, habitat destruction, toxicity of all kinds, and sometimes that's even in our own homes. Species endangerment and extinction started to get more noticed. And of course, you have the aesthetics. It's really no fun to see a house that's already falling apart a year after being built, where there once was a beautiful little grove of cottonwood trees with a few boards up in it that made a treehouse palace for some kids. These concerns spawned a lot of environmental organizations. Most of the organizations that we know and love today, Sierra Club, National Wildlife Federation, Defenders of Wildlife, etc., they had their origins during this period. They were based on the assumption that you had to work with the political system in order to make changes that would result in a better environment. And there's nothing wrong with that. You really do have to do that. And from that we got an EPA, which has been sometimes effective, sometimes not. Sometimes the EPA has engaged in projects that seem designed to fail. Other times, of course, they have standardized their drinking water. People don't realize what a beautiful blessing it is to be able to go anywhere in the United States and drink a glass of pure water that won't make you sick. It's wonderful. And legally, that is what has to happen in this country, everywhere. And that's not the case in most countries now. So we have made progress. But of course, we see enough deterioration going on and enough causes for scientific alarm, because all the things I listed, we now have to add to that climate change, because we're becoming more conscious of that, especially in the past few years. And it's not just global warming either, because warming doesn't explain a lot of what's going on. But I used to work some with wastewater plants. That was part of my practice. I was married to a wastewater treatment plant operator for 14 years. Learned a lot just hanging around her. One of the things that happened one day was we were in downtown Thermopolis, Wyoming. She opened up a sewer line, and I was looking down into it. And what's flowing down there is normal. 98% of what's in a sewer line is water. 98%. Doesn't take much to mess up water. And all of a sudden, some oil, some gunk from some auto repair place down the street started coming down the line. And the water was all turbulent and icky and crazy. And then that passed and the water was smooth again. And I realized an important engineering principle. And most engineers kind of know this, but you don't hear it expressed much. Any fluid that has random hydrocarbon residue in it will become more turbulent. So our problem really is global turbulence. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, all of the bizarre phenomena we're seeing with oil and stuff in the atmosphere is explained. And we see the weather patterns doing what we would expect them to do under those conditions, which has become hotter, colder, more rain, less rain. Tornadoes and hurricanes, we should remember, are nature's way of cleaning up the atmosphere. And even ordinary rainstorms to a degree. There has to be some particulate matter in the air for precipitation to occur at all. And of course, if there's too much particulate matter in relation to the atmosphere, as there is in parts of the Sahara Desert, well, then you won't get any precipitation. But if you have the right balance of particles, you'll get sufficient precipitation, and that's how the atmosphere keeps renewing itself. It's a beautiful cycle. And of course, now we've got too much particulate matter everywhere, and nature tries to make adjustments through all these automatic mechanisms that were set up a long time ago, but sometimes it seems futile. It's sad. But this is a reason for us to find new technologies, because you can pretty much find where the pollution's coming from. It's not that hard. There are 8 million chemicals out there, many of which are not registered anywhere. We don't even know what they do. And we have, of course, the burning of various types of hydrocarbons, diesel and gasoline especially. each of those has its own profile, and each country puts out its own profile of pollutants. And so it's interesting that pollutants from one country affect the weather in another country, and people don't even quite realize that's what's happening. Of course, if people wanted to get into a blame game, it could get pretty ugly pretty fast, but that's not the point. And the point is that we have all these different profiles, and we have all this fuel being burned, and that is driving a lot of what we're concerned about. So you had developments coming up in the 70s and early 80s, solar, wind, geothermal, biofuels. I got involved in the solar business in the early 80s, and we had kind of a rough go of it because I was competing against liars. It was odd, they had a tax credit for $10,000 for a solar system. You spend $10,000, you get some off your taxes, and it was a pretty neat deal. And there were some companies, and no matter what you had going on in your house, the system would cost somewhere around $10,000. Amazing coincidence. I actually, being an environmentalist, I found it was worthwhile to look for the best bang for the buck you could get, and discovered through some experimentation and some hard jobs that solar air worked better than anything. You could make it out of practically nothing. You could make some of your solar panels out of construction waste material, and you could get a lot of heat for that. And your payback was negligible because sometimes you could literally use scrap, and that was wonderful. That wasn't a popular idea. The $10,000 tax credit was better until, of course, what the government giveth, the government can taketh away. And they took us away back in 1985, and that was that for the solar business. And we lost a lot of ground in the interim because a lot of the technology that had been developed and researched in the early 80s was literally lost. And now we just have a few plans and photographs floating around. I put some of the photographs of some of the installations that were done at that time up on the web, so those are archived now, and a few other people have done similar projects. So this will help. You can look for that and you can find it. And that's a resource that we have. Well, a small number of engineers, electrical engineers, concerned scientists, they started looking at more advanced technologies. And that inevitably included the work of Nikola Tesla. Tesla's work was incredible. And there were several research threads left behind that never were fully developed. And the stories about Tesla's work are fairly well known in other sources. We won't really go into that too much here. But he did have some solutions that looked like they would really help in terms of environmental profiles and essentially give us what Tesla said could happen. And he said this in 1905 when he was working on his world wireless transmission system. We will never have to burn another drop of fuel. Now when you think about that, and you think about the huge proportion of environmental degradation that happens simply from burning fuels, and that includes, unfortunately, even natural gas. How do we do that? Well, fortunately, in this group, and in the groups that are aligned with the breakthrough energy movement, there are plenty of people who are now discovering it every day. We're making little advances. This summer in Philadelphia at the Tesla Days, we saw a team of engineers fooling around with a replication of Tesla's wireless system, and they had it hooked up to a solar panel. It wasn't quite working all the way, but there's a step. And there are a lot of little steps like that going on all the time now. Michael Lees out in California has done some awesome work putting together a lot of different duplications of the technology and has found that the parameters are pretty loose. A lot of ways to build these things that are going to work. And so that's good because, again, you can start recycling waste material or as Buckminster Fuller likes to say, above the ground mining. And you could get all sorts of materials and cost efficiencies just by doing that. We also have a few other researchers who came to light during this time, especially in the early 80s. T. Henry Moray, E.V. Gray, they've probably been mentioned by other speakers. A lot of informal networks and structured organizations arose out of this research, and one of the prominent ones was the International Tesla Society. That's where I came in because I was a volunteer with them. And we had conferences first every 2 years and then every year. A lot of amazing technology presented each year, step by step. And some of the threads have gone away. We don't know even what some of these things were all about. We had a few people who were clearly perpetrating various types of fraud, but we also had inventors who were systematically, gradually coming up with better technologies. I'd like to mention in that context George Weissman, who picked up on the work of Yul Brown. So we have the Brown's gas generators that he's put out. Weissman also was able to find some great carburetor improvements. We had John Bedini, and of course, if you've been over to the New Energy Systems Trust booth here at this event, you've seen a couple of guys who are working with that technology hands-on, and that is incredibly promising because there we're using the natural resonance of electrical materials to derive a lot of, you could say, hyper-efficient processes. Now we're at a point where each new energy technology should be evaluated in relation to the positive environmental effects and develop specific profiles of different technologies so that each project can have a profile developed. And I'm not saying we should do this on a governmental or administrative level. This is something we all can do for ourselves. And that's the best way to go, really. If we are self-policing in this, it'll help a lot. And I'm asking a lot, but we need to. One of the sad tragedies in our current environmental situation comes about from organic chemistry. Unfortunately, in organic chemistry, you had an attitude for years and years. Well, if you can do it, let's do it. And this is how we got those 8 million unknown chemicals out there and all the pollution that goes with them. And sometimes these chemicals have been developed under complete secrecy. How often have you bought a cleaner and you tried to find the ingredients and they weren't listed? They don't have to. And so some people don't. And that's tragic in itself. When you think about that and multiply that by 8 million, we have a problem. And one of the things I'm saying here is that it's possible for us to create even worse environmental disasters than the things we've seen so far if we're not careful. So, yeah, I'm sitting here advocating some caution, and I'm sitting here advocating caution self-generated. The last thing we want in this movement, of course, is for some government agency to come together and start breathing down our necks and say, "Oh, you can't do it that way." And it's not going to work. And that's going to create yet another layer of obstruction to what needs to be done. It's going to take probably about 500 years to clean up the basic damage to this planet. I'm including in that, by the way, a project to rejuvenate the Sahara, because that's a key area. That's supposed to be a mixture of rainforest and savanna, which is a type of grassland that's kind of like low prairie. Very, very fertile. There are 4 rivers underneath the Sahara that can be rejuvenated. Once those rivers come back up to the surface, we're going to find that this planet can become not only healed, but an absolute paradise. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and it's going to be kind of fun if we do it right. So we have the possibility to produce power generation systems free of pollution and possibly totally non-toxic, which would be great. And then there are several other research lines that are emerging out of that same context, and we're going to mention some of these more specifically now. What I want to do in the rest of this presentation is go directly into a list of technologies that was developed for this conference. It's a wonderful list because we haven't had such a list really up to now. And by organizing our thoughts around these different technologies, we can start making more rational evaluations. And I think we're going to do a lot better at finding, funding, supporting, and extending the projects that are going to have the most effectiveness. First on the list is Tesla's wireless system. Tesla's system was centered on that beautiful mushroom-shaped tower that so many of you have seen pictures. How many people have seen the pictures of Tesla's mushroom-shaped tower? That's what I thought. That's a great grand motif for our whole movement. And that tower was designed, so there's actually more underneath the ground than there is on the surface. He had tunnels and structures going 300 feet down into the earth. Huge masses of metal included. He said it's all in the grounding. And the first time there was a replication of his technology, the wireless technology, in 2006 on Long Island at a conference, a very small conference, we really got the truth of that. You have all these guys that were crawling on the floor trying to find the right ground, and it just happened that we were in a hotel that had a poor electrical system, so it was quite a scene with all those guys scurrying around like little critters, you know, trying to, well, will this wire work? Maybe that wire will do it. And yet, under those adverse conditions, we got something. We got a little bulb to light in the air, and we knew we had it. So this wireless technology is incredibly efficient. It's less resource intensive because the only place you're using any appreciable amount of metal, copper, is in the transmitting and receiving coils. Interestingly enough, the receiving coil, and Gary Peterson has proven this, you don't even have to use as much material for the receiver as you did for the transmitter, because on the receiving end of it, it only has to look like the transmitter as a resonant match from the viewpoint of an electron. That means you have a tremendous amount of latitude in design for a receiver in the wireless system. More latitude there than you do for the transmitter. The transmitter, we know certain things have to happen. And yeah, you're going to use a lot of copper. That's part of the environmental profile. And yeah, we can get some of that from our above ground mining operation. And the amount of copper we use in the initial transmitter coil is significantly less than what we're going to use for a power transmission line. One of the big recommendations, and I really, really hope somebody picks up on this soon, is that we have remote wind power generation facilities set up so that you can have a transmitter there next to the wind generator and transmit the electricity down into a valley nearby where the electricity is desperately needed for irrigation. And this can be done on a third world basis. It's not going to take all that much in terms of expertise, time. It just takes a community. So that's a wonderful, promising technology right there. Gary Peterson's is one working scale model. I mentioned Michael Lee's. Should mention Henry Ong over in Philadelphia and some of the people working with him. Quite a Nelson Lim Chua, another one. quite a number of people now, and this is going to help a lot. So the environmental profile of this is very positive, and the wireless transmission that Tesla developed is something that definitely we should be pursuing. We have not found heavy electromagnetic fields coming from these systems. That's another source of environmental pollution. One of the things I used to have to do when I was doing the environmental assessment business was go to homes that were located near power lines, and people were getting severe health problems sometimes moving into a place. Gosh, you know, it's terrible to watch a 6-year-old kid with cancer and then find that right above the front of the house, 2 feet away from the house, is what they call a primary transmission line. It's not even the big power line. It's one that runs from neighborhood to neighborhood. And that was sending a field right into his bedroom in a sort of a tent or cone shape coming out of that wire. So everything right underneath it was clean, but a few feet away, that poor kid. But anyway, we also found a lot of waterbed heaters, by the way, just a little household hint. Those put out fields that really hurt people too. And so naturally, I get out some of the meters and I get out a shortwave radio. You can detect a lot with a cheap shortwave radio. It's amazing. And they have those for sale in Philadelphia for $15 at some of these discount stores. Brought one of those into one of the demos at a conference in 2011. And we could not find a signal. I expected when Nelson flipped the switch, we would get all over the place. Nothing. Something is going on with that type of wireless transmission where the field does not exist. It doesn't seem to have any presence between the receiver and transmitter. Where the receiver is, it picks up the resonant field and translates it back into electricity. In between, we don't know what we have, but we don't seem to have health effects. And this again tracks with what Tesla was saying. And by the way, Tesla really didn't think that shortwave radio was such a bad idea. He didn't think that would hurt people, things in that band. But there are bands that do hurt. I'll get to those in a minute. LENR is another technology we need to look at, formerly known as cold fusion, low energy nuclear reactions. The environmental profile of that is fairly straightforward. We do have some possibility of toxic or polluting substances that could be used in these systems. For example, there's a lithium reaction. You can get lithium poisoning if you're not careful. Palladium, well, you can have a little bit of it in the human body, but not a lot. It's not good to have around in great quantities inside your body. So you have to make sure that your systems are well contained and that everything is in good shape that way. That said, the amount of materials used in LENR arrays is usually pretty small. And that again adds to a positive environmental profile. So you have a few heavy metals, some radioactive isotopes of hydrogen, and of course lithium. Those are all things that can be present in these reactions, and you just have to make sure they're well contained. There's a potential for nuclear waste. It's small but present. Everybody who goes into this field should get themselves something called a Nucleidkarte. These are developed in Germany at several universities, primarily Karlsruhe. And these Nucleidkarte plot out the decay sequence and characteristics of every isotope there is. Fascinating study. And if you start getting familiar with that, with the types of patterns, there is one type of radioactive decay you have to watch out for, and that's alpha particles. And by the way, an alpha particle is the same as a positive ion. I know that sounds a little hard to believe, but it's true. That's all it is. An alpha particle can do the same things a positive ion can do in the body, and we know about those coming ahead of storms. We had some on Thursday ahead of that big wind we had last night. That's always something that you watch for with big winds, and it's one of the reasons why emotions of people in Boulder, by the way, are always going up and down, because of those ion fields that roar through town, usually ahead of a windstorm and during the windstorm. Wind always, that type of wind that we had last night, always produces a lot of positive ions. And what's a negative ion, by the way? That's another thing that you find in radioactive decay sequences. Those are simply free electrons. And a negative ion is a good thing to have. And they help your breathing, they help every metabolic process you have. So if you have an LENR that's primarily emitting beta particles, that's free electrons, that's actually a positive environmental profile, unless of course you have way too many all at once, which is fairly rare. And when you study the nuclide character, you'll see that. So that's a fun thing to think about. And the third type of decay, by the way, comes from gamma rays. And those are very, very high frequency on the electromagnetic spectrum. Once you get the frequencies very, very high, you have a lot of problems, which we'll see when I get to the directed energy part. Okay, hydroelectricity, generally a good environmental profile, except for damage to landscapes, habitat, and agricultural properties. There's a case right now in Brazil where a key tribe, the Capayo, are being displaced. We need to find every Capayo we can, every living member of that tribe, and hire them. These people are the only people left in this world who actually know how to manage the Amazonian environment. None of the other tribes in the Amazon, because of various historical factors, actually have the knowledge that the Capayo have. And hydroelectricity right now, as we speak, is displacing those people. So we got to go and search them out and see if we can do something about that. Because they can help us. They can help everybody. Now, hydroelectricity, you see, has a lot of problems that weren't apparent at first. And a lot of First Nations people up in Canada, they can give you reams and reams of information about native environmental problems with hydroelectricity. So let's look at other possibilities. And Tesla did put up several. Some of them, by the way, have to do with just pulling electricity from cosmic rays that are always hitting the planet. And taking those ultra high frequency things, cosmic rays, gamma rays, X-rays, and transforming them down into usable electricity. That's certainly possible, and that is clearly found in some of Tesla's patents. Magnetics. Magnetism in some forms and frequencies can definitely have adverse health effects. So far, studies officially done by governments have been contradictory, and that's in the interest of a lot of corporations. I think a lot of people in the electromagnetics business, in the cell phone business, etc., would rather not know. I guess I could see that. But we do have to watch our magnetic motor technologies. Just get one of those little magnetometers, a Gauss meter. Some of them are fairly cheap. Of course, you have variations in quality. You get what you pay for in that field. If you can afford a good Gauss meter, get one. If you're really working on a magnetic project, you'll be glad you did. And you can precisely measure the fields coming off of it. You can see their extent, which actually is usually not too big. Most magnetic fields fall off fairly quickly. So really a lot of magnetic motor projects are going to be best solved in terms of environmental profile just by keeping them a little distance from where people are working. There are also several types of magnetic fields. That information is beginning to come to light, and as that does, we can integrate that into our environmental considerations and actually find some really, really useful fields too. Plasma gas. There are inherent inefficiencies, there are inherent efficiencies that reduce the potential for air and thermal pollution. Now, plasma gas projects include Paul Pantone's GEAT, and I saw a couple things out there in the exhibit area. I didn't have a chance to look at them as thoroughly as I'd like, but we do have what we call low temperature plasma. Now we know the majority of matter in the universe, the material universe, is in the form of plasma. That's an actual fact. We living in these supposedly solid bodies are rare in the universe. This has a lot of implications, and you also have the old consideration that plasma existed at 10 million degrees Fahrenheit and above. Well, now we're finding out that they can exist at much lower temperatures, and Paul Pantone really paved the way for us to realize that. So these low temperature plasma actions generally have a good environmental profile, partly because they're using less materials, and partly because the plasma reactions are so isolated from everything else. There might be some problems with metal alloys used in construction of the equipment. That's just something that has to be evaluated individually in terms of metal toxicity. 0-point energy. So far, the designs in this category have tended to be pretty small, and that minimizes in itself the potential for pollution. So I like the 0-point energy concept in a lot of ways. As a matter of fact, some of that implies the use of nanomaterials, incredibly small amounts of material. When you're using that little amount of material, you got very little potential for pollution. And so that's good. The only problem you have sometimes is leverage. You can actually generate more electricity or energy of some sort than what you need, and that can be a problem if you're not managing it well. Now we come to directed energy technology. This is a can of worms. And this is where the most work needs to be done in terms of environmental evaluation. Much of the listing for directed energy technologies is military. And of course, you look at the work of Tom Bearden in the early 80s, and he was talking incessantly about the use of militarized technologies, some of which were apparently derived from Tesla's notes that the Soviets had captured. Some of it, who knows where it came from. Now, of course, you find a lot of different technologies that fall under this category, many of them top secret. There's a high potential for weaponization. Anytime you have that, of course, that means an environmental problem. It's been said that ultimately an army is there to protect your country's environment. Now, if we really lived with that, that would be kind of cool, actually, if we said that that's their duty. It could get a lot better, in terms of the way soldiers have to think. And of course, if you start going into the ancient documents, particularly The Art of War by Sun Tzu, he says flat out, the worst thing you can do is get in a fight with your enemy. Now, if we keep that characteristic in mind, that phrase, that can help too when we're dealing with military stuff. I'd like to get rid of all military hardware. I've never owned a gun. I've been urged to repeatedly throughout life and just never have owned one. And I've been in a lot of strange situations, as you might imagine, never needed one. So we can live like this. It's been proven. And not just by me, in my limited experience. A lot of people really do pretty well without any kind of weaponization. So this is something that we can apply on a wider scale. We can apply the teachings of various people like Peace Pilgrim in particular, and that will help our environmental profile right there. We have to look at microwave disturbances and splatter. Tesla specifically said that the frequencies we now associate with microwave, which essentially are above 1 gigahertz up to what we call infrared, that range of frequencies is dangerous to health, flat out. We shouldn't be using them. And of course, what are all those cell phones in our pockets running on? And all those Wi-Fi systems? It's all microwave. We don't know what the cumulative effects of those things are going to be. And so we would do best in developing our new technologies to just kind of stay away from that area for a while until we can piece together what's going on. I suspect a lot of what we're going to find is that we have to operate on resonance. So if you have a resonance that goes like this, that's, can you hear that? I'll just sit down and do it right. Okay. You have a resonance like this, that's an octave. That resonance is good. Now you have a resonance like this, that's not so good. Because of the size of cells, human cells, almost any kind of microwave beam, you might say, or wave pattern or anything like that, getting into the cellular level is going to create that kind of dissonance just with the cell structure itself. It's entirely a matter of size. You go up a little bit to a different interval, that's called a third, you're in better shape. You could actually create an entire science of chemistry and also an entire science of directed energy just using musical intervals. Thank you. That short piece was actually part of a very long body of music I put together that is a set of ideal intervals for chemical equations. Okay, now we come to, on the list, cavitation. Again, we relate to acoustics there in a very direct way. Cavitation always makes noise. If you've ever been in a wastewater treatment plant and heard some pipes undergoing a cavitation sequence, which is very undesirable, man, those noises are horrendous. Anybody studying cavitation should study acoustic resonance. That'll help. And that'll help clean up that environmental profile. Other than that, you have the usual concerns about materials, alloys, metal toxicity, things like that. Cavitation is a legitimate technology to research. Just in addition to your normal research, understand acoustics and you should be okay. Last one on the list, as we have it here, is vortex. Now, vortex is a funny word because you hear it used by, well, sometimes fraudulent operators because it sounds so cool. Man, if it's a vortex, it's got to be cool. Well, we don't know that for sure. We do know that every material object in the universe has a neutral center. I am advocating that we stop using the term black hole. At the center of every gravity, every galaxy, and every gravity structure, like a planet is not a solid ball of matter. A planet is a lattice work, a structure of gravity in infinitely long and infinitely thin lines. When we start realizing that, we're going to get a lot closer to working with gravity control. For example, you notice I partly classify gravity control more with vortexian technology than anything else. And there's a reason for that. And if we start understanding the right kind of mathematics, we'll start seeing that instead of sitting there trying to calculate your limits and your differentials and your sigmas and all that with calculus, it breaks down when you apply it to gravity. And I see a nod in the front row. Yeah, there's people who've tried that. If you go along with the type of vortexian mathematics that more and more people in this movement are creating and analyzing and putting out, you're going to find that vortexian processes become easy to understand. You'll find that most movements in the universe are helical. They're in spirals. There are no orbits, but there certainly are a lot of spirals. Because remember, if the Earth seems to be going around the sun is going around the galaxy, so the Earth is actually moving in this spiral path, following the sun as it moves in its spiral path around the galaxy. And all of this held together by a neutral center. And there's a quote from the Tao Te Ching, an ancient Chinese manuscript, that says, a wheel is very useful, but it is only useful because of the hub, which does not exist. So there's your principle of the neutral center found in ancient Chinese philosophy. When you get into the Vortexian mechanics, you get into a lot of things that are totally harmonious with the way nature actually works. Victor Schauberger saw it. And of course, we know he ran into some guy named Schicklgruber who caused him a lot of trouble and set research back tremendously. But we have some of his data to work with. We have data now coming in from Baumgartner, who passed away in the past couple of years. We have Dale Pond's data that's constantly being built up out in La Junta. And we're finding more and more that Vortexian mechanics is a really, really good way to go, and possibly is a factor in all the other technologies I've mentioned in making them effective. Now remember, avoid weaponization, avoid using toxic alloys and chemicals, but yeah, let's go and build some stuff. And when we build it, let's look at how nature built it. Now the mathematics, I'm going to mention three sources. One is the man who just spoke here, Randy Powell, who I don't know, but gosh, I'm getting a lot of good reports on his work. Marco Rodin has developed a Vortexian mathematical system that's going to work very well. And of course, there's the master of all of it. And I've recently discovered you can get this in a PDF form for free on the internet. You have to do some digging around the R.W. Gray site, but you will find the entire text of Buckminster Fuller's Synergetics available as a PDF for free, and you can start studying it. And if you do, you're going to find yourself coming more and more into harmony with the way nature does things. And that's, of course, the best thing. I'm also linguistically advocating that we stop using the word sustainable, except where it really applies, which is, well, we're going to get by as long as we can. Nature does not develop sustainable systems. Nature, if you start looking at it, go out in the fields around here, look at the weeds, that'll teach us. Nature develops huge amounts of abundance. Every weed has tens of thousands of seeds coming out. Every cubic meter of earth has tens of thousands of seeds in it, held in reserve. If it gets a little dry, the desert plants start coming up. If it gets a little moist, the montane plants start to come up. And if it gets in between, the prairie plants come up. That's the way it works throughout the Front Range. Nature is always creating huge amounts of material. And it's not sustainable, it's regenerative. That's what we're really looking for. And that's what we start finding as we explore Vortexian mathematics, because we start seeing a math that's based entirely on natural processes. And yes, this moves us into a higher consciousness level, and it's just exhilarating to think about it. And we find that this mathematics alone can help clean up our environmental behavior, and it can also start giving us the design parameters we really need to put together functioning projects. We also find, too, that elemental transmutation, it keeps getting mentioned here somehow. We all grew up in school knowing that that's impossible. One element does not transmute to another except under very controlled conditions of radioactive decay. Well, we're finding out that's not true. Unfortunately, again, we've had to deal with fraud. We've had a few people coming up and they'll do some chemical reaction. There's a little bit of white crud left over on a piece of metal. And, hey, look, that's gold. No, I'm sorry, that's white crud, okay? What we really need to do is see what's really going on with the possible mathematics, and a lot of it is resonant. And when we start understanding natural resonance, we're going to discover that the Vortexian mathematics, synergetics, Rodin's work, Mr. Powell's work, all of this is going to give us an entry into a much more enlightened age. And we can use this material for not only developing more environmentally sane technologies, but also, and I think even more important, a higher level of consciousness. So planning to do environmental assessments on these new technologies is a wise move. We're in a position to prevent a lot of problems before they happen. And we should remember something too. It's kind of a good general rule of thumb. All environmental problems are fundamentally ethics problems. If you start looking at it that way, I think we're going to make a lot more progress. We're going to end off with another piece on the harp, something to hopefully send us out with a good little bit of resonance on our hearts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for your very pure, it was a very pure and non-judgmental assessment of all the technologies. It was really refreshing. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Is this
Thank
this
you.
is yours?
Yeah.
Okay. You're in for a real treat. 4:30. I don't think Stephen's here yet. Stephen Ross will be doing his presentation. You have never seen, unless you've seen my interview with him on Gaiam TV, you've never seen these images before. This is his first public presentation. He's going to be showing you images, which I'll introduce him in a little bit, of energy and life from a microscopic viewpoint. People have guessed about it, they've done renderings of it from their experience, but we haven't seen it. And there's a reason for that, and you're going to be seeing some unbelievable images. And we have about 15 minutes before he starts, and what I thought I'd do, if you want to get up and wander around, take a break, that's fine. How many of you know Patrick Flanagan? Patrick Flanagan's work? Okay. So I'm bringing it up for a reason. This is a really just fun little practical thing to bring up. It is thought, and it may be so, that Patrick Flanagan he has the intellectual body of information embedded in him that Tesla had. He told his mother from the time he was a little kid, I was Nikola Tesla. He was building Tesla coils in his garage by 7, 8 years old. Had the most sophisticated ham radio system in the world at that age. And he went on to become the creative source of a lot of technology. Certainly the military-industrial complex have been buzzing around him his entire life. It's been a difficult life for him. But what I wanted to talk about is just briefly share a little practical info with you that he gave me recently. And it has to do with the radiation levels that are circulating. So first I want to tell you a little story about that. I interviewed a woman for CMN, Conscious Media Network, which is in the Gaiam archives, named Elena Tanetti Vladimirova. She came from Siberia. She was raised in Siberia. They had, virtually her entire life, a leaking nuclear plant. It was one of the very first plants that went in, didn't have backup systems, it was leaking. She said the experience of the community was that half of the people and their offspring had some serious damage to their DNA, deformed offspring and so forth. The other half of the offspring, or of the people and their offspring, had these kind of supercharged immune systems. It's almost as though their bodies were utilizing and eating up and using the radiation for fuel in some way. So I bring that up because I don't think we should just go on the assumption that it's going to kill us. So I'm just prefacing it with that. Every body responds to every influence very differently, energetically and physically. And so Patrick, one of his recent projects has been, I won't mention the other person, I don't have that agreement, has created an ultra-sensitive Geiger counter. This Geiger counter can see the full spectrum of every one of the constituents of radiation. There's some strange stuff in there that should not be in there that he won't talk about. There's no reason to talk about it publicly. It could get him in trouble. I'm not going to mention it. I just said it. So anyway, there's some strange stuff in there. The exposure is much more prevalent than we have been led to believe. All over the planet. So this is a great concern to him. His whole thing is about health and healing and wellness. He's the one that came up with the Mega H formula that extends the life of our telomeres and boosts the immune system, extends life, does all that. He did that a long time ago. So his passion is helping us get through and live to our what should be our natural age, which is nothing like 85, 75 years old. So he's into health, well-being, life extension. So one simple little fix that I wanted to share with you, I even have a phone number if you're interested. He was saying one of the best things you can do for your body, having to do with heavy metals toxicity, radiation exposure, and actually other toxic exposure, is to really simply take organic sulfur, which is MSM. Take MSM, half a teaspoon of it dissolved in water, juice, whatever, in the morning, half a teaspoon at night, or a teaspoon, whatever your body can tolerate. It doesn't give you kind of icky side effects of big detox programs either. But if you take that, what happens, which is what I learned from another doctor, he's an elderly man, pristine in his practice, famous in Asia, the great white hope in Asia because he was curing even stage 4 cancer. I know that the beginning of his protocol was 3 weeks of detoxing and dumping these toxins from the cells and heavy metals before he would start doing his magic through nutrition, MMS, and a few other things. So I had that validated. I already had that in my mind. The man was credible. I won't go into anything else about him. He died last year. So when Patrick told me this, it made absolutely perfect sense, of course. So it's a really simple fix. And the source that the original doctor used, because he was a purist, he wanted the purest of every, he wouldn't even let me have cheese unless it was from the Amish people. So this guy was a real purist. And this was the form of organic sulfur, or MSM, that he liked. And let me give you the phone number. 888-345, oop, missing a digit. Let me pull that up for you. Under contacts, MSM. The guy's name is Norman. He'll answer the phone. He sells you a big bag of it for $12 or $15. He's not in it for the making of money. It's just something that he does and he can do, and it's clean. 888-345-6681 if you want to get some really clean stuff. It's cheap. It's like $12 to $15 for a big 1-pound bag. Otherwise, go to the health food store. You'll pay more. It'll be in little bottles and better packaging. This is a plastic bag. So anyway, I just wanted to pass that on. He had some other, Patrick had some other really cool stuff that I just tried to reach him. He just tried to call me back and I missed the call because I'm nervous about sharing this with you without really understanding the science of it, but I can give it a go and just tell you what the solution is if you care to hear it. I mean, you don't mind? Okay, so when I interviewed him at Gaiam in the studios at Gaiam TV several months ago, he was talking about a new technology he was working on that he said he could take these dissonant frequencies, which Michael was just talking about, and you can feel him when he was plucking it on the harp. Taking these dissonant frequencies that are being created by microwaves, radio frequencies and such in our environment, and transmute those frequencies into a bio-friendly frequency. And I said, are you going to tell us the secret? Well, I'll have him back on the air later to talk about it, but a week or two ago, I saw him and he told me privately what he did, and it was very noticeable. He was at a little conference and wandering around. If you know Patrick, Patrick's eccentric, beautiful heart, but eccentric. He's wandering around with no shoes on with these deep red toenails, and everyone thought, well, it's a fashion statement, you know. He had red toenail polish on. So someone called him on it and said, what's up with this red toenail polish, Patrick? And he said, no, that's that technology. It's just a really low-tech version of it, where you take jeweler's rouge. It's a red powdered substance. There's something in the frequencies of that powder. And he mixes it with lacquer. And he said, when you put it on the toenails, what it does is it's not so much transforming the frequencies, but the pulsing intervals of the frequencies. And once the pulse rate starts doing kind of a biomimicry thing, he said those frequencies through those meridians will start evening out the effects of all of this microwave technology in the body. So if anyone here is a physicist or bioengineer, maybe you could explain what exactly might be going on there. But that's what he's doing right now. So we have that to look forward to. He said this can be done on a larger scale, even used as paint on homes or rooms and so forth. So it's something interesting coming up. I just wanted to bring it up because he was focusing on Tesla so much. I thought I'd give you a couple low-tech things Patrick explained to me recently. So with that, we have still about 7 or 8 minutes if you want to stretch your legs. And I have to tell you, you cannot miss Stephen Ross's presentation. Unbelievable. So what? We're all good to go. Stephen's being mic'd up. Okay, most people think it's happening still in 7 or 8 minutes and they're out having coffee, so I would rather wait for a few minutes to make sure everyone sees this who needs to. After dinner, everyone be back by 6:55 if you'd like to hear Gerald Salente of Future Trends. He's going to be on the panel, but only for 10 minutes at the very beginning, okay? Then Richard Dolan is actually presenting over there at the beginning of the panel. He'll be back in the room. He'll sprint over here. He'll be here by 8 o'clock. So he will be on the panel. And we have Mexican food for dinner. So whoever likes Mexican, that's what you have to look forward to. Okay, we about to settle? There we go. Cool. I met Stephen for the first time. It was roughly 8 or 9 years ago, somewhere in there. And at that time, we started talking, and through some obscure comment, we found out that he and I, in 1987, and we've been trying to determine which month it was, we may have been there at the same time, we were tearing around Europe. I was interested in everything having to do with energy healing, and so I had a cameraman with me. I was doing interviews with these amazing physicists and doctors in Europe. Meanwhile, Stephen is there for his World Research Foundation, trying to scoop up all the information he can on a variety of subjects. We were both into, finding out the secrets of color healing at the time, among many other subjects. And at that time, we both ran across a few characters that are just dear to both of our hearts as brilliant, brilliant scientists. Dr. Wolfgang Ludwig, who I mentioned briefly yesterday, Dr. Bernard Muschlin, and Kurt Obrecht. And that's really where this story begins. Kurt Obrecht was the inventor of a super microscope called the Ergonom 4000. And at that time, when I arrived there, and with a camera, I was the first journalist to ever do anything on it. Stephen says he beat me there. I don't know. We can't figure out who was there first. It doesn't matter. The point is, he had it hidden in a closet in his little place in the Black Forest. He was quite concerned. Optical physicists had told him, what you have here is impossible. But the wonderful second half of that statement was that they told him, it's impossible, but I will figure out what the theory is behind this, because I'm looking at it and it's real. We're not using anything like that today. Actually, the Ergonom 400 or 4000 did end up becoming patented. He was worried about it at the time, didn't know which country to patent it to. It was a big deal, and the reason is because he was very well aware of what happened to his predecessors who did superscopes, including Royal Raymond Rife. Well, Stephen was absolutely smitten with the potential of this microscope for both science and for the effects on humanity. And through a series of bizarre events, he ended up in possession of the original Rife universal microscope. Not very many people know this story. Many more bizarre and strange things happened after he took possession of the microscope. I'm going to let him share those other parts of the story. And as astounding as that is, in the mix here, he came in contact with and in possession of a body of work of a little-known inventor that he should be one of the biggest names in the field of science, no doubt about it. The man's name is Elmer Nemes, and he had created the Nemoscope, which was a superscope that exceeded Rife, exceeded the Ergonom 4000, exceeded everything. And Stephen's passion is to bring that information to you today, but you're also going to see, other than if you happen to watch my interview with him on Gaiam TV, which he went public for our audience, this is his first public presentation of this technology that existed. How many of you have ever heard of the Nemoscope? 2, 3. Friends and family don't count. Okay, 3 people. Everyone should know this. Everyone that knows about Rife should have known about the Nemoscope, but he met an unfortunate end as well. So without any more ado, I'd like to invite Stephen up, because he's going to be showing you images of the matrix of life, the energy of the molecule itself, which no one else was ever able to capture in real life. So please, big round of applause for Stephen.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation and the possibility of presenting this information. I'd like to start out with a little bit of a story, since most of what we investigate is always a matter of perspective. Aristotle, the great philosopher, was walking along the Mediterranean, and he saw in the distance a man running between the water and the shore. And as he came closer, he noticed that it was the town madman. And as Aristotle got virtually right up to the man, he said, "What are you doing?" The man was carrying a bucket, taking water from the Mediterranean and pouring it into a hole. So again, the philosopher said, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "I am going to empty all of the water from here so I can see the beautiful blue-green bottom." And Aristotle looks at him and says, "How are you going to get all of that water into this little hole?" And the man looked at him kind of puzzled and said, "Great philosopher, what are you doing today?" And Aristotle said, "I am contemplating the universe." And the man looked at him and said, "How are you going to get all of that in that little head of yours?" Everything is a matter of perspective. Now, Regina asked a good question about the nemoscope. I would like to know how many people in our audience here have heard of the Rife microscope, not Rife treatment devices, the Rife microscope. This is a very, very good percentage. I gave a lecture to the gynecological endoscopists in Miami, Florida, 1,800 medical doctors from 25 years old to 90, and not one doctor raised their hand. They had never heard of the Rife microscope. 2 years later, I give a presentation to the Dowsing Association, 300 people, 299 people raised their hand up. They had all heard of it, and the only two were waiters who were serving people at the time. Now, there is so much talk that goes on about Rife and the technology, and I want to kind of set a tone of where I am coming from. When I was a little kid in school, there was a game called telephone. And in this telephone, all the students in the class would line up, and the teacher would whisper into the ear of one of the students, "It is a beautiful day." And each student in turn would whisper into the next student's ear until it came out, and at the end it was, that is what I believe has been happening with a lot of the information having to do with Royal Rife. When I first obtained the Rife microscope in 1984, I was given 500 personal letters of all of the medical doctors who were with him, their work logs, the frequencies, newspaper articles. So I am sharing with you the information that comes directly or as directly from the source as possible, and not like the telephone game, which I have sat back in the last 30 years and watched people take from somebody's website to another website to another website and add all their stories. A story to really hone this in would be in 1986, 2 years after I obtained the microscope, I was at my office in Los Angeles and happened to take a call of a woman who said, "I heard what happened to the founders of your organization." Now, I am one of the founders, and I thought, really, what did you hear happen? The founders were gunned down in their front yard coming out of their home in the morning. I said, "Really?" They were gunned down. I said, "How did you hear about this?" "Well, last weekend I was at a rec room of a condo project, and they played the Orson Welles movie of Nikola Tesla. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. It was great. After that movie, they closed the curtains, and we heard the story of Royal Rife and the Rife microscope, and the two founders who had possession of it, and they were shot dead on their steps." And the woman says to me, "Did you know them?" And I said, actually, I saw one of them in the mirror this morning. So, stories galore. I'm going to speak about the Rife microscope and the nemoscope. I want you to note when Royal Rife died. 1971. Now, I'd like to clarify, because in real life I'm a very lighthearted, joking kind of guy, but in the program it said, Stephen feels a lot of the Rife frequency devices are scams. Well, that's pretty strong, and I really have not said that, but what I have said is Royal Rife did not build or did not design any of the Rife frequency devices that are in existence today since he died in 1971. I am kind of a purist, and I believe we should go to the source and see original material rather than, again, copies. The Rife microscope was a light source microscope, which means that they could watch substances, microbes, bacteria, whatever they looked at, for unlimited amounts of time. On your screen is a dinner party from 1931. This is taken from the original photographs that we have in possession at our foundation. What were these men celebrating? Well, they were from the most prestigious universities: Arthur Kendall, Northwestern; E.C. Rosenau, Mayo Clinic; Lowell's Barker, Johns Hopkins. These men at the home of Milbank Johnson were celebrating the end of disease and illness. Now, that's a pretty heavy statement in 1931. Here is the article that appeared in the Los Angeles Times discussing this dinner party held at Milbank Johnson's home. So what did these individuals feel had been discovered? This Rife microscope, this 60,000 power device, was a light source microscope. Because of the unique principles that Rife had developed, counter-rotating Risley prisms, he was able to illuminate any microbe, virus, or bacteria in its true, inherent, natural vibration. Each specimen he looked at had its own unique color. Now, why is that important? And for a group that we have here who is very much technical, you will understand, but I do want to make the presentation also so the lay people in our audience will also understand it who may not be here. Color is a rate of frequency. It is a vibration. And once that these individuals who did the research saw that there was always a purplish ruby red color associated with a cancer tumor that they found, they had a basic idea of what the frequency was that was inherent in that particular virus. Now, Lee DeForest, the father of modern radio tubes, built a frequency generator the size of a wall. And what they would do is they would peer through this super microscope. It would take them sometimes 4 hours to focus, because in their writings, and again, I am not sharing from websites, these are their actual letters that they wrote back and forth to each other. They would sometimes focus for hours and realize it was a piece of dust that they had mistaken for a substance they were looking for. Then they would have to refocus again. Once they found that color, they would turn the frequency dial, and when they hit the mortal oscillatory rate, the exact frequency, the color would be gone, the microbe, virus, or bacteria was instantly destroyed. Now, how long did this take? Well, have you seen the example of when a singer sings and hits a particular note, a man or woman can break glass? It was basically the same with what they were saying in their notes. They would hit a frequency, one frequency, not for an hour, As soon as that frequency was hit, all of the microbes, viruses, or bacteria at that frequency would be devitalized or destroyed. Now, how could they test this out? They took a woman's breast cancer tumor, took it out of her body, cut it in half. One half, they went through their concoction where they could inject it into 100 albino rats. All 100 rats developed cancer from that cancer tumor. Then they took the frequency that they had discovered, they beamed that frequency at the rats, and all 100 rats were cured of the cancer. Now they took the other half of the tumor and they used the frequency on that part. Then they injected that in an additional 100 rats, and not one of the rats got cancer. As I'm talking and telling you this story, I want you to understand who we're talking about is the medical doctors. Mayo Clinic, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, USC School of Medicine, Northwestern University. Because if you go on something like Wikipedia, they have a nice little story about Rife that goes, he was a scientist who purported to have developed a microscope that people thought that they saw certain colors through. Well, it wasn't certain people, it was the best medical authorities in the United States at the time. Here we have Royal Rife, and this is a picture. Now, who was this incredible genius? He had to have been university trained, and he must have just been an amazing individual with a great background. Well, he was a chauffeur for a man named Timken in San Diego who made ball bearings for carriages. Now, there's a lot more to Rife, but that was his basic profession that people know about. And Timken, on his off time, said, what would you like to do? And Rife said, I have some ideas about microscopy. Okay, so Timken gives him and builds a $1 million laboratory in the early 1920s. If we have some people who are up on that, think of $1 million, what that would be the equivalent today. And Rife made all of the parts of this microscope. Having a microscope that is actually my hand, I don't know how famous it will become. The most important thing is this microscope, but this is the size of the barrel of that Rife microscope. As I'm presenting here, I have several purposes. One is to introduce what I consider the factual aspects, but I also want you to be aware of what these two men achieved. They achieved what was considered and is considered impossible. Because I have a very philosophical bent along with being a caretaker and librarian, and I believe that there is a very, very much stronger side to all of us if we have the understanding of what we are capable of doing and don't be blinded by other people's conceptions of what are our boundaries. Now, over the years, I've had many people come up to me and go, oh, the Rife microscope was a myth, there's no such thing. I'm going, really? Now, I actually had the microscope and had people look at me face to face and go, it's a wives' tale. Well, this is an article in the Los Angeles Times, The Wonder Work of 1931, with Royal Rife and Arthur Kendall of Northwestern University. This is one of my favorite articles. We have the original article at our World Research. This is Louise Barker of Johns Hopkins. Now, what this article says is, Barker had just come from Royal Rife and viewing the microscope, and Barker says, Rife said, all the scientists are saying that he is breaking all the rules of optics. So Louise Barker says, they're going to have to get some new laws then, because if they're saying he's breaking them and he's doing it, then their laws don't mean anything. Was the microscope real? This is the internal staff minutes of the Mayo Clinic in 1932, talking about how they discovered the elements of the poliomyelitis virus on the Rife microscope. So this thing with the wives' tale and it didn't exist doesn't really hold water. This is the cover, and I know you can't read it. I personally don't like just reading things to audiences. I just want to have these as a backdrop. The first paragraph says, "It is a very commendable achievement by Royal Rife that for many years he has far surpassed the theoretical limitations of a light beam and microscopes." How do you surpass a limitation? Their words don't even make any sense. A limitation is a limitation. The Smithsonian here in the last paragraph of this article says, under the universal microscope, disease organisms such as staph, leprosy, hoof and mouth may be observed to succumb when exposed to certain lethal frequencies. Those frequencies are inherent in the actual element. Now, how did Rife achieve finding what is considered impossible? He did something called heterodyning of light. Most people think of heterodyning sound. You have one sound, you add another sound, you create a third sound. Royal Rife in the 20s did this with a light source that opened up a whole vibrational field that could not be seen under normal microscopes. This is the Smithsonian Institute report of 1944. That is supposed to be the ethical publishing arm of the United States government. Having Rife's original book of formulations, and again, here is something else. I have seen so many websites with all of their theories, with numbers that they've come up with, and oh yes, most of the physicists that have come to me said, I'm smarter than Rife. I said, oh, okay. Why is that? Well, he did this and he did that, and he ran his frequencies through a gas tube, but I've eliminated all that, and I now have my frequency devices, and they're all great. And I asked this very simple question from any of the audience, and if you've got information, did any of your sources ever have the original microscope? Did they ever see the original lab notes of the frequencies? Because if they haven't, the question is, where are people pulling all these things from? I have been vocal in my comments about some of the Rife equipment because people will come up to me and go, I have this Rife machine and I want to know, and it's really fantastic. And I ask them a very simple question. Has your machine been validated? Because these scientists really spent a lot of time, when you read their letters, when you look at their test results, to discover the frequencies and the work they were doing. But I hear back, Steve, we haven't tested it because you know the FDA would be all over us. I said, look, show me a bona fide examination of a person before using your Rife machine. Show me an examination after. Cross out the doctor's name, cross out the patient's name. I just want to see a real scientific evaluation. And by the way, did your test subjects change their diet? Are they meditating now? Are they doing yoga? Because if they are, how do you know whether it's your Rife machine or it is their change of lifestyle? Now, why am I adamant about this? And you'll understand now. Because people who have used Rife's name have now screwed it up in many places all over the country. They have the Rife machine is banned in certain areas because the people who built this and stole his name got in trouble with the authorities, so we can't even come out with the real machine because his name is banned. So if you feel a little animosity from me as a caretaker, that is very upsetting because it isn't Rife's original material. 60 diseases and illnesses we have the specific frequencies for, and out of his lab, he did many things. This is spinal meningitis. They found the thermal death point for various elements, microbes, viruses, and bacteria. Why is this such a danger? What happened to this Rife microscope that showed so much potential? Well, one thing is this letter that I found in my group of letters, and this is from November 4th, 1936. Rife and his group in San Diego, California, one day, something happened with their frequency machine. And in this particular letter, I'm going to paraphrase it, but this is what they said. One day, we hit an oscillatory rate that destroyed every experiment in our entire laboratory. Every test animal stayed healthy, but every virus, microbe, everything we worked with was instantaneously destroyed. One band of frequencies. The only evidence we have is they said additionally, the mold melted off of the leather chairs and a particular shaped window in the bathroom in the house in San Diego broke. So I got some pretty wise people here. So that's your clue. Should be pretty easy, right? Something that melts the mold, breaks one form of window, and that one frequency destroyed all of their experiments. Did they report that in any of their notes? No, unfortunately they did not. Why is it dangerous? Because they also were able to do and prove a concept called pleomorphism. Pleomorphism is basically a mutation of one form or substance into another. So they were able to take a Bacillus coli in the colon, and by applying frequency, they were able to convert it into a typhus element. Now, I want you to realize what we're saying and why this is so important. Because you are not always obviously invaded from something outside that jumped into your body or that you caught. We have all of these elements. We have all of these microbes. We have all of these viruses residing in us all the time. But when the environment or the element has changed, then there is a mutation that takes place. Now, they tried to report this. That was Arthur Kendall at a big bacteriology conference, and he was booed down. He was told to shut up. The letters were that I read about the incident were really tragic because that's impossible. In fact, in my German office, they have a saying. It must not be because it cannot be. In other words, even if they see something, they really didn't see it because it's impossible and it can't really happen, therefore I really didn't see it. It's very convoluted, but that's how a lot of our science is. It really can't happen. It's got to be a myth. Royal Rife was a low-key individual who was so shy that he had to be told by the other doctors in his group, try to look these people in the eye and carry on an intelligent conversation, because he didn't want to leave his microscope. If he did, he was racing motorboats, he was playing music. That's the typical pose in the 40s and 50s, as you can see. He was brilliant. One important message I want to be sharing with you all is the aspect that no laws are really ever broken when you have new discoveries. It is an old Hermetic philosophical principle that you use higher laws to supersede lower laws. And now, for the real entertainment portion of my presentation, I want to demonstrate this principle of law. I have a regular piece of paper here, folded in half with a paper clip. So I want everybody to be careful because I'm launching this into the audience now. So, okay, I'm going to keep trying. Oop. That's pretty good. There's a piece of paper. There's a paper clip. Thank you. I need this for the next lecture. Here is a piece of paper. I have the same paper clip. Are you guys ready? Bring it on. I love that. Okay, so when I practiced 50 times, it always went straight. But, oops, sorry. I'm going to do it one more time in case I was just a fluke. Then into the right. I wish there was some award or prize, but that's not in the budget. Okay, so what did I do? There was a certain law with that paper and a paper clip. I didn't break a law. I used a higher law to supersede another law. That is what it's all about. Sometimes people are looking so much to broaden, to enlarge, to go beyond something that other people have done without realizing that, no, go up to a higher plane. Think way out of the box. Often I hear people talk about, yeah, I'm going out of the box. They're not out of the box. They're still in that basic box. Especially here with the brilliant minds. Think of this example. Just really recognize you have other laws that are around. Royal Rife obtained 60,000 magnification. That was 10 times more powerful than anything that was in existence at the time, and in reality is still even greater than the research microscopes that are in use today. And I'm going to be showing you some examples and pictures through the electron microscope, and you're going to see the difference of what you can really see through that type of instrument. First of all, the electron microscope, you put it in a vacuum, the substance, you bombard it by electrons, and the substance is destroyed. You cannot look at anything live. Rife was able to look at substances live for as many hours as he chose, 60,000. But now here we have Elmer Nemes, 1950s. He builds a microscope that can magnify in diameters 3.5 million. Elmer Nemes was a surgeon, and he builds what looks like a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, but it isn't. And he did something very, very similar to Rife. He had a theory that if you cause a radiation in the substance, it will broadcast out its inherent frequency. You can turn that into light and then project it onto a screen or through a TV. He was able to achieve 3.5 million magnification, but he didn't do it by any kind of focal length. Now this is very odd. Most of you may not know how microscopy works, but it has to do usually with the light beam and what is possible. He did not work on focal length. He used emissions that he developed around the neutron, below the neutron level, bombarded the substances, and was able to penetrate the outer shell all the way down to the atomic level. Now, this is a picture taken through an electron microscope at 63,000 magnification, and all you can see is black and white images. This is a picture through the nemoscope of latex. This is a piece of latex. This is a piece of latex. Now, what are you looking for or at? I've had physicists, until they really realize what this is, you are looking at the energy fields around the atomic structures in this substance. This is the polio virus at 63,000 magnification. This is the polio virus through the nemoscope. This is an electron microscope. This is a nemoscope. I went on the internet not too long ago and someone asked the question, has anyone seen a picture of an atom? And you get all these comments. People go, yeah, there was a picture of an atom, but it was a computer rendering that was made, on Photoshop. We have the original of this picture. What you are looking at is the atomic structure and the energy bonds. And I don't see really a pointer up here, but you're looking at the energy bonds between the atoms. I'm just going to leave it here for a minute or two so you can absorb what you're really looking at, because no eyes have really seen the energy connecting the atomic structures. And they did not have the computer Photoshop when this was done in 1952, and having the original and their work information, we're very sure of this. The second picture shows as the substance is removed from its source, you are looking at the decay that takes place in the structure as the energy field is dissipating. This is an iron nuclide. This is a cancer virus at 3.5 million magnification. And to my knowledge, there aren't any other pictures, since there's a lot of debate. What causes cancer? Is it a virus? What is it? This was taken 1952 in the plasma. This was in the urine of a known cancer victim, and it's interesting that it looks very much like a crab. Cancer crab. Now, I'm going to go back again because it's not right and it's difficult in an audience, but again, I'm going to start back here. You don't need to prove to energetic practitioners that there's an energy. Some of the scientific type who question it, they're the ones who go, no, this can't really be true, and you're doing this, you're doing Reiki, or you're doing acupuncture, and there's no energy, and how do we know? You are looking at the energy bonds. You are looking at the decay of the energy field and how the integrity of the structures become lost. This may be a difficult picture at first to understand, but you are looking at the magnetic flux lines next to a magnet. You are looking at this north and south poles around the magnet. No human eye has ever seen that. Again, we look and we go, how is this possible? And we're talking the 1950s. This Elmer Nemes was one smart guy. He did not write everything about how he obtained this, but there was no question, again, having his original, there was only one record left of all these pictures. Now, I had decided if I did a whole presentation on Rife's life or Nemes's life, I make hour, 2 hours talks on that. So I chose not to go into great depth. But what happened to Nemes and what happened to this microscope? Well, Nemes had it in a Photoshop in a place called Studio City, California, to repair part of it, and somebody broke in and it was stolen and never appeared again. That was it. That was the end. This was 1957. A few years after that, Nemes was killed in a barroom brawl, and that is why only 2 people or 3 people raised their hand that they had ever heard of the Nemescope, because everything disappeared. The only reason that there is any pictures is a woman named Betty Lee Morales, who started the Cancer Control Society, who was an ex-CIA agent, who knew Dr. Nemes and helped him with these pictures, had his presentation book off the premises, away from the Studio City camera shop, or we would not even have any more records of this. This is the original book that we have of Rife's frequencies, the actual frequencies that he and his group had. Now, what happened with the Rife microscope? I showed you in original pictures of the men at the dinner party celebrating the end of disease and illness, and within 6 years of that picture, all the doctors in that photograph, all of them but 4, claimed that they didn't know anything about a cancer cure. They didn't know anything about Royal Rife, that they were never, they never had any information about him. How do I know this? Because of the various letters of Rife writing to his remaining doctors supporting him, going, whoa, what has happened here? All of a sudden, we're abandoned by all of these medical doctors. Now, was it because they discovered it was a farce? No. Did they discover that they were just being flim-flammed, that the pictures and the visuals they saw were made up? No, because there's never been a negative article that said that the Rife microscope was a fake. It's as if it just disappeared. This is one great advantage of the internet now, because if the internet was around during Rife's time, 10 million people would have known what he was doing. Because there is a big difference between Royal Rife and Elmer Nemes. Rife found the frequencies, then they used them on patients. They took 16 terminal cancer patients to the Mary Ellen Scripps Ranch in La Jolla, California, and within 30 days, all were deemed clinically cured of cancer. How do we know this? Because of their letters. And by the way, their letters, I'm going to reveal a little bit about myself. I have been collecting information. I've been doing this 40 years. Our foundation has 30,000 books dating to the 1400s in all the different specialties, everything we can identify. When I read through those 500 letters, I cried. Because when I think of all the people who have died and are dying of cancer, and these people supposedly had an answer. I'm going to be very conservative. They supposedly had an answer using frequency, and how many people have died? He was abandoned. It's too many. He was abandoned because the other doctors were basically threatened. The AMA and Morris Fishbein wrote a letter to Rife saying, we will tell all the other doctors if you give us a piece of the action. The AMA wanted a piece of the action of every Rife microscope that was made, and they didn't even inform any other doctors that it existed. That's greed. That's just to show that is actually me there in a very relaxed state. And the history of Rife is really phenomenal. And I just hope that anybody who's really interested makes an effort to really understand what was involved and what they were doing. This is the NEMIS presentation book. As I said, there's just one book, thankfully, that we have. Now, what about duplicating these? Of course it's possible. Emerson said, when I find narrow viewpoints, I find narrow reading. If something is not in your realm of thought, then you don't even go there. You don't even think about it. We need to constantly be broadening our thoughts of where we want to go. All of these things are great that I've heard. The energies are great. It's very important. But just think of having the right tools where you can really be examining what is going on in much deeper levels than just the visual. This isn't really rocket science here, that everything in the universe vibrates and is in energetic motion. When I hear the term energy medicine, what isn't energy? What really isn't medicine? Energy medicine, when I first started, I always thought of it as just color and sound and music, but it is so much more broad than that. What to me is emerging breakthrough energy are spiritual selves. The real breakthrough energy is not some of the things that I've heard. It is who we are, and as we break through and understand who we are, and that energy resides completely around all forms, that will be the big breakthrough. I speeded through a little bit here because I do want to get into the philosophical. I think the philosophical that I'm just getting into is very important. Anything that has been created outwardly exists inwardly. The old Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as below, so above, is so profound. Everything I showed you here is possible to be duplicated by us. By us. Anything that exists. Paracelsus said in the 1500s, every star that exists in the cosmos has a foci point within us. Every plant in the field has a foci point within us. Every sound that is generated in the universe has a corresponding point within us. I heard a couple of the other speakers, the speaker before the last one, really talk about energy and spirit, and I want to reiterate that. I will share, I normally don't at conferences, but I think it's important that I share with you. How did I find these? How did I get the Rife microscope or the nemoscope? Through dreams. I had dreams at night of telephone numbers and places to go in the world. What's my background? I have an advanced degree in business. I'm math, science. I went through school on athletic scholarships. I eat jelly beans. I'm just a regular kind of guy. Have a great relationship. But I had dreams. All of us are capable of so much more. And so, yes, I've shown you mechanical things. I've showed you physical, but I always feel a little remiss if I don't point out to everybody who we are and what we're capable of. Those two gentlemen, and my silly little example here of the plane, they transcended the barriers of thoughts that they had been locked into. I heard a gentleman a little while ago talking, and he had some good points, but the vehemence was just so strong. I personally had to leave the tent, even though I agreed with probably everything he said, because that really, that's his way and that's fine. I just believe that we are capable, when we put ourselves in an open space, of achieving everything and anything. Our World Research Library contains individuals who have transcended their particular spot, men, women, and attained something great. I gave a talk about 3 years ago at a place called the Creative Life Center in Sedona. And I don't use notes in any of my lectures, so it wasn't too terrible for me, but the night before my talk, I had the following dream. So if you're with me this long, I'm going to share this dream. I was walking along the ocean, and with me were all the people of the world. And ahead of me was a beautiful woman in blue. And she had a microphone.